Welcome back. When the man named Emad invited them to his home, the two young men didn't enter an ordinary flat. That very threshold was the gateway to another world, filled with the mysteries and secrets that humanity has sought since the dawn of time.
The two young men entered the flat after being invited in by a man called Emad. They were astounded by the interior. It was a beautiful, classical and antique-styled flat. The welcome was exceptionally warm, and Emad went off to fetch some refreshments.
Crikey, look at this place. Looks like your uncle's found a real treasure. No, you silly sod. It's from my granddad's inheritance, which my uncle got.
Emad came out of the kitchen, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of juice and 2 slices of cake on silver plates. The two men took them with gratitude, and then a conversation began about Emad's life after he had left the house and moved out.
After that night, I went looking for a flat to live in. Of course, my inheritance was a godsend in those days. I kept searching until I found this flat. I rented it and put the rest of the money I'd inherited into a bank deposit, which brings me in a good income every few months. It's enough for a comfortable life. But to secure my future, I opened a law office, which boosted my income, and I've carried on studying any field of science and language that takes my fancy. So what about you? What have you been up to?
I'm studying at the Faculty of Commerce now. I forgot to introduce you to my friend, Yusuf. He's a law student. I know, Uncle, that you have a great interest in the history of bygone nations and their myths. To be honest, we stumbled into a rather strange problem.
What is it?
Yusuf took out his phone, opened the photos of the manuscript, and handed it to Emad. Emad took it and began to read calmly. Yusuf watched Emad intently as he examined the photos and read them. Not a single expression on his face changed as he read. Emad read at an incredible pace until he finished the pages in no time. Then he looked at Ahmed and Yusuf and said with a slight smile,
This is the manuscript of the City of the Dead by Sheikh Ibn Ishaq. How on earth did you get hold of this manuscript?
You know this manuscript?
I read about it in some of my books years ago. Where did you get these photos from?
Yusuf and Ahmed looked at each other, and then Yusuf began to tell the story of how he found the manuscript at the Al-Azbakia fence market, and the information he'd gathered from the internet, and then his meeting with his friends. He didn't mention the dead man who had sold him the manuscript. When Yusuf had finished speaking, Emad gestured for them to follow him into one of the rooms in his flat. As they walked, Ahmed said,
Do you study magic, Uncle?
Emad paused for a moment, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. Then he continued walking, saying,
I know that the memory of that night is still in your mind, and you want to know what I was doing. But we have to start the story from the beginning.
At that moment, Emad opened one of the rooms and switched on the light. Yusuf and Ahmed followed him inside and were taken aback by the sight. The room was furnished with a luxurious carpet, and there was a desk, a computer, and a massive bookshelf that took up the entire wall, with books neatly arranged. Behind the desk chair was a painting featuring human skulls with horns mixed with blood. It was a macabre yet fascinating sight. Imad walked to some of the Arabic and foreign bookshelves and ran his finger over the spines, looking for something as he spoke.
When I was a child, I had a talent for reading very early on. By the time I was 13, I was fascinated by everything strange and any creepy story or myth. I would use my pocket money to buy books about weird things, and I always bought them from pavement stalls because they were cheap. It was then that I came across a book on magic and summoning jinns. I started trying to decipher the incomprehensible phrases and words used to summon spirits in that book. It occurred to me then that perhaps there were books in other languages that would help me to analyze those phrases. So I decided to learn English to improve my ability to read English books. I asked my father to enroll me in an English language center. He agreed immediately and encouraged me. I showed an unusual aptitude for it. A year later, I was reading and speaking English fluently. I felt like I wanted more, so I learned French, a language I loved, and became proficient at reading it in less than a year and a half. My obsession with languages and reading books in Arabic, English, and French grew, and I also learned Persian and Hebrew. Of course, because I was completely absorbed in studying languages and reading, I didn't get high marks in my A-levels, so I went to law school. It was perfect for me as it allowed me to skip classes and focus on my other studies. By the end of university, I was fluent in speaking and reading English, French, Persian, and Hebrew. I was also good at reading Urdu, Russian, Latin, and Syriac, and I had a decent understanding of hieroglyphic and Coptic symbols. This was all made possible because my late father never held back on money for me to study whatever I wanted, even though he thought I was only studying English and French. The main thing was that I was always searching for a diamond in the rough, something that would make me stand out from everyone else, something that would challenge me to search for it. Then I remembered the reason I'd started studying all those languages and other subjects in the first place. I remembered the magic book whose codes I couldn't break when I was a child. So I decided to focus all my efforts on studying everything to do with magic, jinns, and spirits. I began to track down everything written about the paranormal in all languages and in all public and private libraries. Within 2 years, I found myself getting to some strange truths about these bizarre things. I began to analyze everything I came across to distinguish what was myth and what was real. And I started doing experiments until the day the incident happened at your house, Ahmed. I chose to stay away from you so I wouldn't harm you with my research and because of the way the family treated me after what happened.
Imad spoke his final words as he held a set of books. He placed them all on his desk and invited Yusuf and Ahmed to sit on the 2 chairs opposite the desk while he sat behind it. Then he said,
Regarding this manuscript, it's a very tricky subject, and I only know a little about it because so very, very little has ever been written about it. There was a French fellow named Michel Amadeus, who was a French archaeologist who was in Egypt in the 19th century. He accompanied a mission that came to Egypt on orders from the French government to study some things requested by France without the knowledge of the King of Egypt at the time. The mission returned, but Michel Amadeus decided to stay for a longer period, so he lived in Egypt for 10 years after his colleagues had left. After he returned, he wrote a report on the things he had studied on behalf of the French government, and then he wrote a book describing his life in Egypt and how he traveled between towns in Upper Egypt to study the pharaonic temples. I was reading this book because it contained a valuable analysis of some of the old customs in southern Egypt, along with a wonderful description of many Egyptian temples. However,
Imad opened one of the books, which was written in French, and flipped through its pages for a few minutes until he stopped at a specific page. He scanned the words with his eyes and translated them with ease.
Michel says on this page that he had friends from the south, whom he used to sit with at night to socialize and talk about various matters. One night, a friend of his called Hassan told him that he was keeping something very valuable that an Egyptian man had entrusted him with to keep in his house. When Michel asked about this trust, Hassan told him that it was a set of tanned canvas pages with a story about a man written on them. So Hassan brought the set and read it to Michel, who recounts, "I don't remember the exact words that were written on that canvas, but I remember that they belonged to a man named Ahmed bin Ishaq, and that he seems to have traveled from Upper Egypt to Cairo. On his journey, he came across an Egyptian village where he found no living people, and he met the spirit of a man who had died years ago. The spirit told him the secrets of summoning spirits to rule the world, and gave him papers on which he had written the method and the summoning text. I tried to convince Hassan to give me the set, but he refused even to let me copy the text to study it. He told me that it was a trust from a man, and he couldn't possibly betray him. I won't lie, I read those words and I knew that part of what the man said was right, and part of it came from his culture, especially regarding the subject of spirits and controlling the world, because such beliefs could never have existed in the Islamic mindset at the time. But I wanted to be sure, so I learned that there was an Arab scholar whom history didn't pay much attention to because almost all his books were lost. This scholar's name was Ahmed bin Ishaq el-Baghdadi. My search ended there, and I was about to forget about the matter entirely, until I came across a book by the writer Ahmed Magdi that discussed ancient Arab myths, such as ghouls and jinns, and Western myths, such as the Greek ones, and their effect on people's beliefs and minds in the modern era. In one of the chapters, he dedicated 3 pages to the traveler Ahmed bin Ishaq al-Baghdadi, his life, and his story with the city of the dead that he came across on his journey from Upper Egypt to Cairo, and how he informed the Egyptian government about it. However, the government denied everything about the existence of a village in the area that Ibn Ishaq had specified for them. Ibn Ishaq's end was his disappearance and the burning of his books. The author said in the book about this myth that there was a missing link that he couldn't figure out, because the ancient Arab mind couldn't have created myths based on dead people speaking or doing anything in the physical world. But the character of Ibn Ishaq was real, and his book about the strange city was also real. So, did people pass on this story and alter it until it reached us in this form? When I read that book, I decided to search more seriously for the story, and I was lucky because the author had written down the references he had used for these myths. I went back to the Arabic references and found what I was looking for in 2 of them.
Imad gave the book he was talking about to Ahmad for them to look through. Then he picked up the other 2 books and said,
in this book, which is over 111 pages long, one of the chapters mentioned the news about Ibn Ishaq, which was taken from a group of narrators. The author says that Ibn Ishaq had many pupils, especially during his time in Egypt, where he had a study group of the Azhar Mosque and his pupils. But after his book spread among his pupils through his close pupil Abdul Rahman bin Ibrahim, the famous scribe of Ibn Ishaq's books, he was accused of heresy. This is a horrible charge if you ask me, as it implies more than one thing, reaching the point of describing a person as someone who pretends to be a Muslim but is an infidel on the inside and tries to cause corruption on earth. The matter started with the burning of his books, and then Ibn Ishaq disappeared completely. His pupil, Abdul Rahman bin Ibrahim, who was said to have recorded important excerpts from his master Ibn Ishaq's books, only had a few sets left, and we only got to hear about them through a man from Upper Egypt who said that he saw a manuscript telling a story about a city where everyone had been dead for many years, and that the manuscript was with a man from the south who was keeping it in his house as a trust passed down through his family until the man who entrusted him with it came back for it. As for Abdul Rahman bin Ibrahim, he disappeared completely without a trace. It was said that his body was found years later, and it was also said that his grave has never been found to this day. There was also a narrator who said that a man told him that a Persian wizard had come to Egypt and chose 4 Egyptians to introduce to make a pact with the jinns to make them rich. When Ibn Ishaq entered the city, he met one of the men who had died, and he gave him the method to summon the jinns to make him rich as well. Finally, this book, which is a doctoral thesis on myths, mentioned something extremely strange.
What is it?
The author of this thesis assumed that the city actually existed, and he used some maps from a number of historical periods in Egypt before the 18th century. He compared those maps with modern ones and began to predict the old location of the village, despite the difficulty of pinpointing Egyptian villages before the 18th century, especially since that period was full of revolutions and internal conflicts. As you can see, Yusuf, this researcher took that myth seriously and did his research, and he concluded that there was indeed a city in that location, and that there's a real chance that the city or village was wiped out by the rapid spread of a plague, which the researcher believes was cholera, and that the Egyptian government neglected the village out of fear of the plague.
So this manuscript is real?
Yes, but it could be a fake text. I'll pass judgment on it when I see the real manuscript.
Wait, do you think it's a fake from what you've read?
Imad thought for a good while. His head bowed, then he looked into Yusuf's eyes and said,
I believe it's 100% real. There's something that puzzles me about those words. They contain some of the names of Jinn kings pronounced in Syriac, which is a very old language that was spoken in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus, peace be upon him, and remained in use for more than 7 centuries. And some of the other names are in Arabic, and I don't know the reason for the difference. There are words that I think I don't understand, but I know that the way their letters are put together inspires a feeling of dread in me. It's not a random combination of letters. The Arabic words point to more than one thing that I can't pinpoint. You can send me those pictures so I can use some references. I might find something important. And we should stay in touch.
That's brilliant. Mr. Imad, you said that you've read a lot about magic, so do you believe it's real?
Magic is real, and I'm not going to come here and tell you it's a myth. If it were, it wouldn't have such a long history spanning thousands of years. Despite the number of countries where magic has been practiced, there are common principles that connect them all.
How?
Cultures shape the concept of a person who lives within their environment. If you brought a Bedouin from the desert and asked him to describe a mythical creature from his imagination, he would describe a large, ill-defined monster that can eat human flesh. And if you brought a European man, he would describe a huge monster with fangs that also eats lost human flesh. So there are things that are common in cultures and unified, but their description differs from one civilization to another. You see one culture calling the sorcerer someone who makes a pact with the devil, and the Arab culture says that the sorcerer makes a pact with the Jinn. And another culture tells you that a medium uses spirits to serve him. Don't you notice the similarity in the idea behind all of the above? So there's a core concept that you see in all cultures, but it differs from one environment to another.
It seems like you have a lot of information, but I still want to know what experiments you were doing that day in our flat, and why don't you want to reveal them yet?
It seems I'll have to tell you part of the truth.
Ahmad got up from his chair and started walking around the room, pondering as he spoke.
Can you see jinns and devils? Of course not. But why not?
Is it because of the nature of the jinn or the devil themselves, or is it because of the nature of your own eyes? This is a subject I came across more than once in my old readings, where in European magic you see that the jinn or devil takes the form of a person so that you can see them and they can speak to you, and you won't see them in their natural form. It's the same in Arab heritage. You can never see a jinn unless it takes the form of an animal or a person, and then you can deal with it and even kill it because it takes on human traits as soon as it takes human form. But I kept thinking that the jinn do something so that I can see them. But why don't I do something so that I can see them in their natural form? What is the organ responsible for sight in the body? The eye, of course. So the eye is just a machine to transmit images to the visual center in the brain through the optic nerve. So the eye is just a transmitter of signals, and those signals are translated in the brain into visual images. I kept thinking, what if the eye captures normal signals and shows them as images in the brain when they are translated in the brain's visual center? Perhaps the brain doesn't translate some signals that it's unable to translate. The brain translates the speed of a bullet as a flash that lights up for a fraction of a second and disappears, even though the bullet passes in front of the eye. Then the eye transmits the scene into signals, and the brain translates it into a flash. In some cases, the signals can't be translated at all, and they have no actual effect on the brain, so they are ignored. My thoughts always made me wonder, do animals see things the same way humans do? Or does an animal's perspective differ from a bird's, an insect's, or a human's? There is indeed a difference, but is that because of the difference of that thing and its instability, or because of the difference in our own ability? Why do people who have long sight, short sight, or can't distinguish between colors see things differently from a normal person? So there's one truth to things, but each of us sees it from a different perspective. That's why we don't have the ability to see jinns and goblins, but they can see us. And that was God's wisdom, and it was mentioned in the Holy Quran, quoting, "Indeed, he and his tribe see you from where you do not see them." End of quote. So that ability was removed from humans, but the jinn can see us. What if I could see the jinn?
See the Jinn?
Yes, why not? You can see in books about magic many ways to gain the ability to see jinns, whether it's for a moment, for days, or for years. I was crazy when I was young, so I started making comparisons between all those methods and listing them and ruling out the fictional ones, and in the end I applied the ones that were thought to be correct to try and make the brain translate the signals it receives but doesn't translate.
So did you succeed and see the Jinn?
You can guess.
So you've seen them?
Perhaps I see them. Perhaps I feel them. Perhaps I see them when they're in a fury. Perhaps I see parts of them. You can guess, Yusuf. Perhaps you'll know soon, my boy.
Yusuf kept looking into Ahmad's eyes for a long time, until Ahmed said,
So when will you finish your research on this manuscript?
I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 days, but I won't be looking into it much as I'm doing research on a more important subject now.
Ahmed and Yusuf asked to leave despite Ahmad's insistence that they stay and have lunch, but they apologized. When he walked them to the door of the flat, he stopped and made Ahmed stop as well, while Yusuf continued towards the door without noticing the pause. Ahmad leaned his mouth close to Ahmed's ear and whispered,
Your friend has 3 jinn following him everywhere he goes. I don't see their forms for a reason I don't know, but there are 3 of them, and they walk like his shadow. Try to be careful.